Have you ever found yourself, second-guessing a decision?
Mhm.
Or maybe holding back a really brilliant idea, all because of that nagging feeling, like, what will they think? It's that little voice, sometimes not so little, that keeps us from, well, being fully ourselves. Okay, let's unpack this. Today we're doing a deep dive into something Michael Gervais calls the fear of other people's opinions. Faux PO for short. It's a huge theme in his book, The First Rule of Mastery.
Mm.
Our mission here is really to get why we give so much power to what other people think, and maybe more importantly, how we can break free from it,
Mhm.
unlock our potential.
Yeah, and what's really fascinating here is that FOPO, it isn't just about um, fleeting insecurities, not at all. It's actually a deep, often unconscious process. It influences pretty much everything, from tiny daily choices to the biggest life decisions we make. And it's fundamentally human. It's rooted way back in our ancient brains where, belonging to the tribe literally meant survival. That wiring's still there.
It really is, and it affects everyone, doesn't it? Take Lauren Regula's story from the book. It's incredible. She's a 39-year-old mom, runs a business. She was an Olympic-level softball player, but had retired like 11 years before. But then this chance came up. Try out for the 2020 Olympics with Team Canada. And despite everything, her age, the long layoff, even battling postpartum depression, her biggest hurdle wasn't physical. She actually told Gervais her main challenge was, and this is a quote, a gnawing concern for what other people think. Wow. She talked about the comments, some real, some she just imagined, like, oh my gosh, I could never do that, or
Yeah.
you still think you can do it. Even stuff like, is Dave okay with you playing and leaving? Judging her as a mom, her age as a wife, her big realization was, my world was revolving around what others thought of my decision. And she said the negative opinions were way more magnetic. Those critical voices just felt louder, much more powerful than any support. So yeah, this deep dive, we're going to show just how pervasive FOPO is, what it costs us, but crucially give you some practical ways to actually overcome it.
Okay, so we've seen how FOPO held someone like Lauren back, even someone that accomplished. But how does this whole mental game actually work inside us? Here's where it gets really interesting. Think about Moby, the musician, Grammy winner, huge artist. He described feeling totally intoxicated early on by seeing himself on magazine covers. He equated it directly with validation and even love. He spent maybe 15 years just obsessing over what people said, reading everything, only to finally realize it's destroying you. He said it was like an addiction. So eventually he made a pretty radical shift. He just stopped. Stopped reading social media comments, stopped reading reviews. Why? He basically said he couldn't stay sane and calm if I'm constantly being torn apart by the opinions of people I've never actually met. And his insight was huge. They're not responding to a person. They're responding to a photo or an image or an idea. That distinction, that's absolutely key, isn't it?
It really is. In Moby's experience, it brings up a really important question. Why do we hand over our sense of self, our emotional state, to complete strangers? Or sometimes, like he said, maybe even bots online? Well, our inherent inclination, biologically, is to form social bonds. It's driven by this deep, natural desire for connection, for belonging. It's survival, historically speaking. There's a psychologist, Dr. Mark Leary, who came up with this idea of an internal sociometer.
The sociometer, like a social thermometer.
Kind of, yeah. He argues our self-esteem acts like this gauge, giving us ongoing feedback about where we stand in the eyes of others. It's a natural monitoring system for our relational value. Now, if Leary's sociometer is the healthy, functional gauge, FOPO is like its maladaptive shadow self.
It's shadow self. I like that.
Right. With FOPO, we reflexively overvalue others' opinions. We get continuously preoccupied with our standing, our survival almost, even when there's no real physical threat. It just drains our internal resources.
Okay, a maladaptive shadow. That's a powerful image.
Yeah.
So practically speaking, what's the difference? How can you tell if your internal gauge is working okay or if you're stuck in that FOPO trap, overvaluing what others think?
Well, a healthy sociometer gives you useful information. It lets you adapt, understand social dynamics, maybe adjust your behavior if needed. But FOPO keeps you locked in this loop, just wasting energy. Gervais actually lays out what he calls the FOPO loop. It's a circular psychological and behavioral cycle that keeps us trapped. It tends to happen in 3 phases. First up is the anticipation phase.
Okay.
This is where we're, playing out scenarios in our heads, constantly asking, will I be accepted if I do this? Or what will they think of me if I say that? Our attention gets yanked out of the present moment, totally fixated on these imagined perceptions.
Right, the mental gymnastics beforehand.
Exactly. Then comes the checking phase. So during the actual interaction, we find ourselves relentlessly scanning for external cues. looking at microexpressions, listening to tone of voice, watching body language.
Trying to read minds, basically.
Yeah, pretty much. It's an exhausting attempt to figure out what others are really thinking. But here's the thing. It's not an exact science, not even close. And we're often wrong, which makes this whole phase incredibly tiring and, frankly, quite inaccurate.
Yeah, I can see that. Trying to interpret every little twitch.
Mm-hmm. And that leads to the responding phase. If that sense of acceptance isn't clear, Gervais points out a few common reactions. We might sort of contort ourselves to try and fit in or conform to what we think the norms are. Sometimes people get confrontational, trying to gauge reactions that way, or we just disconnect, pull back.
Okay, those sound familiar. Is there a better way?
Well, the healthiest option, according to Gervais, is actually to turn inward, to use that feeling of FOPO as a cue. A signal for self-discovery, for skill building. It's about focusing on who you want to be, not who you think they want you to be. Shifting the focus.
Shifting the focus inward. Okay. And you mentioned this loop often gets going because of two main on-ramps to FOPO.
That's right. The first is what Gervais calls a poor sense of self. Basically, if we lack a clear understanding of who we are, our values or principles, we naturally look outside for validation. We give others' opinions way too much power.
Makes sense. If you don't know who you are, you let others define you.
Exactly. The second on-ramp is a performance-based identity.
Performance-based meaning.
Meaning you define your self-worth primarily by how well you perform compared to others. Always looking outward, judging yourself based on external results or comparisons. Both these paths lead straight into FOPE's grip.
Okay, so to help you listening understand your own FOPO loop, here's a little practical exercise Gervais suggests. Try purposefully wearing something, maybe an uncomfortable or really outdated outfit, to some kind of social event. Then just observe. As you get ready, notice your thoughts. That's the anticipation phase. Once you're there, pay attention to your checking process. Are you scanning for reactions? How does it feel? And finally, reflect on how you respond. Do you feel the urge to contort, to explain, to hide? Or can you find some ease with it? Just approach it playfully, like an experiment. It's a really great way to gain awareness of your personal FOPO loop, that exercise sounds like. Yeah, real eye-opener. Definitely uncomfortable, but revealing. Okay, moving on. Let's dig into how our very sense of identity becomes this breeding ground for FOPO, often in ways we don't even realize. There's a famous sports analogy that illustrates this perfectly. Think back to Game 1 of the 1997 NBA Finals. Utah Jazz versus Michael Jordan's Chicago Bulls. Nail-biter. Scores tied, seconds left on the clock. Karl Malone, the mailman, the league MVP, steps up to the free throw line. Huge moment. As he's settling in, Scottie Pippen from the Bulls just walks past him and casually drops 6 words. Hey, Karl, the mailman doesn't deliver on Sundays. And Malone misses both free throws. Jazz lose the game. Think about that. An elite athlete, top of his game, completely knocked off balance by 6 simple words, hitting his nickname, his identity.
It's a perfect illustration, isn't it? It shows the fragility of identity when it's not truly anchored within. Our identity, it's our subjective sense of self, built up from experiences, beliefs, values, culture, all that stuff. And we have this natural impulse to define ourselves, to put labels on. But that certainty can come at a price if the label isn't really true to us deep down, or if it's too narrow, like the mailman who always delivers. You know, things like priest, CEO, mother, athlete. Those are often roles, what we do. They inform our identity for sure, but they aren't the whole picture of who we are. And the real danger of a performance-based identity, like Malone seemed to be in that moment, is that when our words get only tangled up with performance, well, and then mistakes, failures, criticism, even just opinions, they feel like existential threats, rather than what they could be, opportunities to learn and grow.
Right. So if our identity gets so wrapped up in what we do, how does that end up affecting our deeper sense of self-worth? Are they the same thing?
Not exactly, though they're closely related. Our sense of self-worth is more like our internal measure of value, how much we fundamentally value ourselves. Think about Hillary Allen's story, also from the book. She was a top-ranked skyrunner, incredible athlete, fell 150 feet off a cliff during a race, broke 14 bones. It was horrific, and her very first words to her rescuer were, "Am I going to be okay?"
Wow. Checking externally even then.
Exactly. It just highlights that reflexive checking in with others to gauge how we're doing, especially when uncertainty hits hard. Now, thinkers have tackled self-worth for ages. William James, back in the day, thought self-esteem was basically our achievements divided by our aspirations, a sort of ratio. More recently, psychologists Jennifer Crocker and Connie Wolf talked about contingencies of self-worth. Basically, where do we place our bets for feeling valuable?
Where do we get our validation from?
Exactly. Is it based on external things, how we look, our grades, getting approval from others? Or is it based on more internal sources sticking to our virtues, our core beliefs? And the research is pretty clear. Externalizing your self-worth, constantly chasing that outside approval, it leads to higher stress, anger, relationship problems, even substance use few times, and ironically, often lower performance. Whereas deriving it internally tends to lead to lower stress and more stability.
That makes a ton of sense. But here's a thought. What if the opinions we're so afraid of? What if they aren't even what people are actually thinking? Could we be making it all up? Well, there's this classic social experiment by Thomas Gilovich at Cornell. He had students wear what they considered an embarrassing T-shirt. It had Barry Manilow on it into a room full of their peers, and the students wearing the shirt dramatically overestimated how many people even noticed it or cared. So maybe the good news is nobody probably noticed my mismatched socks this morning.
Probably not.
But seriously, this effect has a name: the spotlight effect. We tend to overestimate how much our actions, our appearance, are noticed by others. It's driven by a natural egocentric bias. We're just inherently more focused on ourselves than others are on us. And sometimes that's compounded by the false consensus effect, where we overestimate how many people share our own beliefs and opinions. We assume everyone sees it our way.
And perception itself is just, well, it's tricky. Remember the dress phenomenon a few years back, the picture online.
Oh yeah, blue and black or white and gold, it broke the internet for a day.
Exactly. And neuroscience eventually explained it. Perception is fundamentally idiosyncratic. It's unique to each of us. Our brain doesn't just passively receive information. It actively makes hypotheses. It makes inferences. It fills in the gaps when facts are missing. What we experience as our conscious reality is actually the conclusion of all those inferences. And it's often based on an underlying assumption, a belief we already hold.
So our beliefs filter what we see.
Absolutely. This often gets amplified by confirmation bias. Our mind tends to seek out and interpret new information in a way that confirms what we already believe. We cling to our worldview like our survival depends on it, sometimes ignoring facts that contradict it.
So, okay, if our own brains are busy constructing reality through these filters and biases, do we really have any clue what someone else is actually thinking? Michael Gervais tells a story about himself here. He was supporting an MMA athlete who had a really successful fight. Gervais was visible, walking behind the athlete on TV. Afterwards, his mentor, someone he deeply respected, called him up and just said, "Gervais, what were you doing walking behind the athlete on television?" And Gervais said he assigned his opinion an enormous amount of meaning. He assumed his mentor thought he was grandstanding, trying to steal the spotlight. He actually retreated from media visibility for about a decade because of that comment. Wow, a decade. Yeah. But years later, he finally met his mentor again face to face. And he said all that anxiety just evaporated. It suddenly seemed ridiculous that I'd carried it with me for so long. He realized much of my fear had been projected onto others. He'd made up a whole story around those few words.
That's such a powerful example, and research backs this up. Our ability to accurately mind read what others are thinking. It's not a superpower we possess. Studies show even long-term couples, people who know each other incredibly well, are only slightly better than random chance at guessing each other's thoughts in specific moments.
So what's the alternative to guessing and projecting?
Simple, but not always easy, inquiry.
Asking.
Yes. If you're genuinely wondering about someone's opinion, stop the guesswork, ask them directly, and then truly listen to the answer. Don't filter it through your own fear.
Inquiry. Okay, that's a really practical antidote. So we've mapped out the landscape of FOPO, how it works, how it ties into identity perception. But how do we actually break free? How do we start building that path towards mastery, towards living authentically? Let's look at Beethoven. We think of him as this fearless artistic titan, right? Transforming music. Yet he apparently lived for about 3 years in abject fear of what others would think. Why? His secret was, I am deaf, a condition that directly threatened his core identity as a music god. So he concealed it, became isolated, withdrawn, even contemplated suicide. It was a period of deep suffering fueled by FOPO. His turning point came in 1802 with something called the Heiligenstadt Testament. It was like a letter, unsent, where he finally accepted his deafness. He resolved to push forward, to develop his art regardless of the cost. And Gervais notes that the admission freed him in ways that were unimaginable. He stopped trying to manage others' perceptions and took back control of his own life and art.
Beethoven's journey, it's a profound illustration of what Gervais calls the first rule of mastery, which is, Mastery is an inner-directed life that's then externally expressed. It's fundamentally a love affair with experience itself, with honesty, with truth, with continual exploration. And it always begins with mastering what is 100% under your own control. We waste so much energy, so many internal resources trying to influence things we simply don't control, like other people's opinions. Think about drawing two circles. The outer circle contains things outside your control. The weather, the economy, what other people think or do. The inner circle contains things 100% within your control. Your effort, how you choose to communicate, your mindset, what time you show up.
Focusing on the inner circle.
Exactly. The path to mastery is about pouring your energy into that inner circle and letting go of the need to control the outer one.
And a really key tool for strengthening that internal control, that inner focus, is mindfulness. It's interesting. There's a study that found people often have an aversion to just being alone with their thoughts. So much so that some participants actually chose to receive mild electric shocks rather than just sit quietly and think for 15 minutes.
Wow, really? Shocks over thoughts.
Apparently so. This aversion is often linked to what neuroscientists call the default mode network, or DMN, sort of the brain's hub for self-referential thought, mind wandering.
Where the inner critic often lives.
Yeah, exactly. This is where a lot of unproductive, repetitive, negative thinking can arise, which definitely feeds faux poo. Mindfulness practices, things like meditation or just paying attention to your breath, they can help quiet down that DMN chatter. It gives us space to observe our thoughts without getting swept away by them, space to choose how we respond rather than just reacting automatically. It helps us realize fundamentally that we are not the thoughts we hold about ourselves, especially the negative ones. We are infinitely bigger than that.
And complementing that mindfulness practice beautifully is adopting a learner's mindset. There's that classic Zen parable about the full cup, right? You can't pour tea into a full cup. To learn something new, you have to first empty your cup, let go of what you think you already know.
Be open.
Be open, exactly.
Ah.
And Dan Gilbert at Harvard talks about the end of history illusion. This is our mistaken belief that the person we are right now is basically the finished product, that we've done most of our changing and evolving.
Yeah, have it.
Not at all. Science shows we continue to change and evolve throughout our lives. A learner's mindset embraces that. It sees opinions that challenge our identity not as threats, but as potential opportunities for growth, for new understanding. Gervais has this great advice. When you feel that discomfort from a challenging idea or opinion, just try to smile, breathe, and lean in. That edge of discomfort is often where the real discoveries happen.
Smile, breathe, and lean in. I like that. It's about staying curious. Another really powerful shift Gervais talks about is actively choosing to value purpose above approval. He defines purpose as an internally derived, generalized intention that's both meaningful to you and consequential to the world beyond you. So it's personal, but it also points outward. It's bigger than just you. Think of Coach Leonard Hamilton, the basketball coach at Florida State. He apparently wrote a letter saying he measures his coaching success not just by wins and losses, but by whether his players become good fathers, good husbands. That's his purpose. So for him and for us, if we cultivate purpose, purpose itself, rather than chasing external approval, becomes the new reference point for making decisions.
That shift to purpose is huge. But it does raise an important practical question. Okay, if we're not supposed to care about all opinions, whose opinions should we trust? How do we sort the useful feedback from just noise or negativity?
Good question. We can't just ignore everyone, can we?
No, definitely not. We need feedback to grow. Brené Brown has some really powerful insight here. She talks about getting crystal clear on whose opinions matter. And for her, it's the people who are in the arena with you. The ones who love you not despite your vulnerability and imperfections, but maybe even because of them. The ones who show up.
So having a specific small group.
Yes. Gervais suggests a similar strategy he calls the round table. Identify just a few trusted people, maybe 2, 4, 8, or 10, who truly have your back, who are honest with you, even when it's tough, and whose lives and values you genuinely respect. They become your go-to for meaningful feedback. There's also the idea of a screen, mentioned by Nate Hopgood-Chittick, a former NFL player. It's like a mental filter to help separate the vitriol from valuable insights when you inevitably encounter criticism. And it helps to remember the neurobiology here. When our core beliefs or our identity get challenged, specific brain areas light up parts linked to threat perception, emotion, our sense of self, like the DMN, amygdala, insula. Our brain literally reacts as if protecting us from a physical threat.
So it feels like an attack.
It often does. Understanding that can help us pause before reacting defensively. And it reinforces the need to be discerning about whose opinions we actually let through our screen and truly consider.
Okay, so cultivate purpose, build your roundtable, use a screen. These are great strategies. But it also feels important to remember our fundamental nature here. Gervais makes this point. We are social beings masquerading as separate selves.
That's a profound reframing, isn't it?
It really is. He argues we aren't individuals who somehow learned to be social. It's the other way around. We are inherently social animals who have learned to identify as separate individual selves, especially in modern Western culture.
And this intense focus on the culture of self might actually be weakening our natural connections, contributing to the loneliness epidemic we hear so much about.
So what's the antidote to that?
Connecting to something bigger than you. This could be cultivating virtues like generosity, kindness, humility, not for the external praise they might bring, but because they contribute to the well-being of others, of the community, of the planet. Serving something beyond the self, that connection can be a powerful buffer against FOPO.
Shifting focus from me to we, or something even larger. All right, as we start to bring this deep dive to a close, let's consider what Gervais calls the litmus test. It comes from Bronnie Ware. She was a caregiver for people in the very last stages of life, and she documented their most common regrets, the number one regret. Overwhelmingly, people wish they had had the courage to live a life true to themselves rather than a life that others expected of them.
Wow. Let that sink in. The greatest regret at the end of life was living for the approval of others, living trapped by FOPO. It really highlights this profound disconnect we often have from what truly matters, especially regarding our time. Daniel Kahneman, the Nobel laureate, did a study showing that women, for example, reported finding much more satisfaction in spiritual pursuits than in watching TV, yet they spent about 5 times longer watching TV each day. We often don't act in alignment with what we value, partly because we don't fully grasp how precious time is.
We think we have more of it than we do.
Exactly. Steve Jobs touched on this powerfully in his Stanford commencement address. He said, "Remembering that I'll be dead soon is the most important tool I've ever encountered to help me make the big choices in life, because it strips away the non-essential." Marcus Aurelius, the Roman emperor and philosopher, put it even more bluntly, "You could leave life right now. Let that determine what you do and say and think." Even Jeff Bezos applies this kind of thinking to Amazon. He said, "Amazon is not too big to fail. In fact, I predict one day Amazon will fail." He uses that awareness not to panic, but to focus relentlessly on what they can control day by day. This awareness of mortality, it acts like a cleansing agent. It washes away the trivial, the fear of judgment, everything except what truly matters most.
So it comes down to this choice, doesn't it? You have a choice right now in every moment, really. Are you going to play the FOPO game? Are you going to spend your precious days, your hours, your moments worrying constantly about other people's opinions? Or are you going to choose something different?
And maybe one final actionable tip tied to that awareness. Practice saying goodbye to people, even casually, as if you might not ever see them again. Not in a morbid way, but just to genuinely demonstrate your gratitude for the time you just spent together. Acknowledge the connection. By consciously acknowledging life's inherent fragility, its uncertainty, we can foster genuine appreciation for the present, gain clarity on what truly matters, and free ourselves bit by bit from the noise of FOPO.
So here's a final thought to leave you with. Consider, if your life were a symphony, are you the one conducting it? Are you choosing the music, setting the tempo? Or are you allowing the imagined opinions of an unseen audience dictate the melody?